Okay, Mr. Marshall, it is 6:31. Amherst Media has joined us. They are in the attendees. You do have a quorum of the board. It looks like you have a full board. I believe we're good to go.
All right, thank you, Pam.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of January 31st, 2024. My name is Doug Marshall, and as the chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I am calling this meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this planning board meeting, including public hearings, will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is accessible on the meeting agenda posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting, or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, where the Zoom link is listed at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the Town of Amherst website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and return to mute. Bruce Colvin.
Here.
Fred Hartwell.
Fred Hartwell is present.
Jesse Major.
Present.
Janet McGowan.
Here.
Johanna Newman.
Here.
Karen Winter.
Here.
And I, Doug Marshall, am present also. Board members, if technical issues arise, we may need to pause to fix the problem and then continue the meeting. If the discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment. I will see your request and call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. To the general public. The general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items not on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during the meeting when deemed appropriate by the planning board chair. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address, and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation may be disconnected from the meeting. Okay, our first item on our agenda this evening, here now at 6:35, is approval of minutes. And so we'll start with the December 6th minutes, which were distributed in our packets. Board members, are there any comments on those minutes? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Assuming you all read them. Jesse.
Yep, I read them. I thought they were great. I was just going to move to approve the minutes.
All right, thank you for that motion.
I will
Anybody
second.
want to, Johanna, you got there second.
I'll second the motion.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. Last call for comments on the December 6th minutes. All right, we'll go through another roll call. Starting with you, Bruce. Are you in favor of approving the minutes?
I am approved.
All right. Fred.
I approve.
Thank you. Jesse.
Aye.
Janet.
Aye.
Johanna.
Aye.
And Karen.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. It is unanimous, 7 in favor, with no abstentions or absences or nays. All right, we'll go on to the December 20th minutes. Likewise, does anybody have any comments or suggestions about those? All right. Does anybody want to make a motion? Johanna,
I move to approve the minutes.
thank
That's
you. And Jesse.
I second.
Okay, thank you both. Any comments at all before we go back through the roll? Okay. All right, I'll go reverse alphabetical this time. So Karen, you're first.
Approve.
Thank you, Karen. Johanna,
Aye.
Janet,
Aye.
Jesse,
Aye.
Fred,
Aye.
and Bruce.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Again, it's unanimous with no abstentions or nays. Okay, so that's the 2 sets of minutes we have this evening. Time is 6:38. At this point, we'll go to public comment period. I see in the public attendees, in addition to Amherst Media, I see David Zomek, Elizabeth Vierling, George Ryan, Maura Keene, and Susanna Musprat. So any members of the public that want to make a comment on something that's not on tonight's agenda? Okay, I guess none of the public in our attendance wants to make a comment at this time. All right, we'll go ahead to item 3 on the agenda, which is a continuation of a public hearing. Time is 6:39. In accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, these public hearings have been duly advertised and notice thereof has been posted and is being held for the purpose of providing the opportunity for interested citizens to be heard. This public hearing is continued from December 20th, 2023. This is SBR 2024-03. Applicant is Town of Amherst. Location is 191 West Pomeroy Lane. Request site plan review approval to install 2 ADA universally accessible 6-foot wide crushed stone pads, accessible footbridges, and other site improvements, including boardwalks, benches, signage, kiosks, bike racks, shade structures, and upgrades to existing parking area and a connector path under Article 3, Section 3.335 and Article 8 of the zoning bylaw. Located in the RO, RN, FPC, and FEMA floodplain overlay zoning districts, map 19D, parcel 10. Okay, this, as I said, is continued from December 20th. Are there any board members who want to make a disclosure at this time regarding their relationship with the participants in this hearing? All right, I don't see any hands raised for public disclosure. And I suspect that Dave Zomek is back in the panel so that you can make your presentation. You want to welcome back, Dave?
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you very much for having me. If I could, I'll try to launch right in and be as efficient with your time as possible. I certainly may defer or lean to and on Chris and Nate, as this is a town project and they have been, as with many town projects, quite involved with the evolution of the project. But I think before I get started, I did review the draft minutes, the draft conditions, the draft findings. I thought back on December 20th, it seems like a long time ago now, but it wasn't all that long. We did have a very thorough and robust conversation about this project. And just to remind the board, it is essentially, as the chair read off, a modest trail project with associated parking. That is really, at this point, what this is all about. Although Hickory Ridge is a much larger endeavor on the town's part that may include much larger elements, i.e. the future use of the clubhouse area, perhaps for another town building, perhaps for a fire station, perhaps for affordable housing. What the town's before you with tonight and in this application is really just some accessible trails and parking that will open up this beautiful area for hiking, biking, bird watching and the like, and make it as accessible as we can. And just to remind everybody, we do have some grant money pending, and our goal is to try to get the project done this summer. And in fact, we have bid out the project, and our hope is to get bids in as early as this week and see where we are. So essentially, after reading all of those materials, and again, I will lean on Chris and Nate when it comes to any discussion of the proposed waivers. But I did just want to acknowledge that we are fully aware that we will need to go before the ZBA for a special permit for the bridge, boardwalk, and shade structures in the FPC. And our plan is to do that in the next 4 to 6 weeks as the ZBA schedule allows. I did want to acknowledge, as part of the discussion, there was recommendations from the planning board that we increase the number of bike loops, and I think that's reflected now in our plans. I think one of the major sticking points of our discussion last in December was the parking plan as proposed, and I believe that you have all seen that we have revised that parking plan. We have acknowledged that the existing islands that are there already will remain. We have also asked the fire department and received a response from them. They have both reviewed the plan that was developed by staff, and they also visited the site, and they are they came back with a very resounding, confident acknowledgement that they can easily get emergency vehicles down in the eastern access, the excuse me, the proposed main access to the parking lot for the trails. So that includes, in speaking with Assistant Chief Olmsted, staff confirmed that an ambulance or appropriate fire vehicle could easily get down that eastern access. The grades and slope were not a problem, and the turning radius was found to be adequate for their vehicles. So we confirmed that with AFD. And then we also want to acknowledge that as the project evolves in the future, we will need to come back through appropriate boards and committees, including the planning board, ZBA, Concom, et cetera, as the project evolves over time. But for now, it is essentially a trail project with associated parking. And I think I'll stop there and look to Chris or Nate if we wanted to go through any more specific details of the plan or the waivers.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Take your questions.
I do see Chris's hand, and I will comment that at least in the paper packet that I received, there was no revised parking plan, although I did see a parking plan in some of the email correspondence that was forwarded to us.
Parking plan was included in the email. It came after the packets were put together last Friday, so that's why we had to send it out in email. But I wanted to mention that the fire department also looked at the width of the driveway, and they felt that was adequate to get their equipment down into the parking lot and to solve any problems that needed to be solved there. So I'm willing to go through conditions and findings if you are ready for that or ask questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Janet?
I thank you for getting that information from the fire department. I feel much better, getting their advice and understanding that. I wonder if we might want to just put the parking plan up on the, if we can put it on the board to look at it. I looked at it very briefly. And so I just to look at that, but, the question I have, and I think it might have been answered at the last hearing, is the design review board had made a recommendation about the handrails on the bridges. Having them sort of stick out 1 feet on each side and the slopes. I think you took care of that, but I just wanted to make sure that it was covered.
We did. Thank you, Janet, for raising both those questions. And yes, that will be included on the design of the bridges. We acknowledged, yeah, that there would need to be an approach to each one of the bridges that would achieve the, the ADA status that we're looking for. And also, I'm not going to get the correct terminology, but extension of the handrails on those bridges. So that will be achieved in the construction process. I also wanted to just mention that I believe there was some at our December 20th discussion, there was some reference to the westernmost access closer to the old clubhouse. And essentially what we plan to do there, since the easternmost access will become the trail access and parking, our plan is to really cordon off the western entrance. So essentially that would be bollards with some sort of not gated, but it would probably be a cabled access, only accessible by emergency vehicles, police and fire, so that we would not have people parking near or interfering with access to that building. As I stated on the 20th, our hope and our goal is to bring that building down. That building will not be rehabbed. We have done a complete assessment of the building. It is not salvageable, but we need to come up with funding to remove it and prepare the site for future uses. But in the meantime, we would work with the fire department on a simple cabled access bollards and cable there that the fire department and the police department could access. And that will also help with just safety around the building and also make it very clear that the public should park in this lot that you see before you on the screen. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. As you may know, the fire department has been using that building for training for months now. And they very much enjoy training in the building. But I don't want that to, as much as that training is important for our fire department, we do want to bring that building down at some point in the near future. So I'll stop there, and one of our staff here can answer any questions you might have about the parking.
Doug,
Okay.
could I talk a little bit about the parking lot?
Sure, Janet?
So I went back to the parking lot and I did notice the vegetative islands, which I hadn't remembered. And then I also noticed what Christine Brestrup had pointed out about the parking lot being quite a bit down from the street. So there's not a need for some kind of vegetative barrier. And then the plan looks good to me. And I started to think about this parking lot more like the Sweet Alice Trail parking lot, which is super simple. And, it's just like people pull in, ride their bikes, stop, and then just go out and walk. So it's not, so I think this current plan is very good.
Okay, thanks, Janet. All right, sounds like, or it looks like I'm not seeing any other hands of initial questions or comments. So Chris, do you want to go through your findings and conditions and I've got the list of the waivers that were recorded in the minutes from our meeting on the 20th, but that's all I have.
That's also what I have. Am I muted? No.
No, you are not muted.
Yeah. So
Hold on, Chris. Bruce, your hand has gone up. Do you want to talk before Chris goes or not?
Well, it's in conjunction, really. It's just that with the plan that's up, and I thought maybe I'd make this point while the plan is still up. The first waiver about the steepness of the slope over 5 mentions in the waiver 30 feet, but the drawing here says 5 to 10 feet. So we might want to amend that waiver. So I'm into the waiver discussion, but of course, as I said, while the plan's up, we might as well just verify that the waiver probably does need, waiver number 7 probably needs to be modified from 30 feet to 5 to 10 feet.
Okay. Is that all?
That's it for the moment, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chris, please
Would you
proceed.
like me to read the waivers first and then go to the conditions?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, we have asked for a waiver of the lighting plan because there's no plan for additional lighting here. We've asked for a waiver of the traffic impact statement because we don't believe that there's going to be enough traffic to have an impact. We've asked for a sign waiver from section 8.101 because signs in the residential zoning districts are normally limited to 12 square feet in area, and here we will possibly exceed that. We've asked for a waiver from section 8.103 for signs over 4 feet in height, again in the residential district, because some of these signs will be higher than that. We've asked for a sign waiver from section 8.3 for more than 1 or 2 signs not exceeding a total of 12 square feet in the FPC zoning district. So those are the sign waivers that we've asked for. In terms of parking waivers, the first one is a parking request waiver from section 7.105 for lighting and 7.112 for screening. So the lighting is because we don't expect that this conservation area will be used after dark, and so there won't be a requirement for more lighting. And we've already talked about screening, and Janet agrees that the screening that's there right now is adequate. Number 7, parking waiver from section 7.102. Again, we've talked about that. The slope of the existing entry drive is over 5% for 5 feet. And so that we're asking for that waiver to be granted. There's another waiver of the parking requirement for section 7.106, which is the width of the 2-way drive. And I think Rob Morrow went out and actually measured it. It's less than 18 feet. And what I've written here, more like 12 to 13. I think, again, we should substitute the actual numbers that Rob came up with, which is more like 14 feet 6 to 16 feet 6. So I will do that. And then it's actually a lot wider at the mouth of the driveway. I think it's 48 feet. Is that right?
Correct.
Am I reading that correctly? And then there's a parking waiver from section 7.111 for landscaped islands, but I don't think we actually need that anymore since we have existing landscaped islands, so we don't need that waiver.
Do we need the screening waiver?
I don't believe we need the screening waiver because there is a mound.
It sounds like
And
the
that's-
existing conditions effectively screen it, so
Yes,
we can
there's a-
take that off of number 6 here.
number 6. Okay, screening, yes. There's a berm there, and there's also a lot of vegetation along the roadway edge. So that's it for the waivers. Does anyone have any objection to the waivers?
So I wanted to ask about the signage and putting aside for the moment whether we approve the waivers, we haven't seen the signs. We don't know how big they are. So would we put a condition on that you guys have to return when you've got a plan for the signs?
That's a good idea. Yep.
That would be fine.
I mean, I kind of feel like why should we, even approve a waiver now, just because there isn't any plan to refer to. And simply put a condition on that when you've got a signed plan, you come back and we'll either give you waivers or not.
I think if you don't mind my saying it, we did have information about the signs and it was in the packet for December 20th. I don't have access to that right now other than paper copies. Nate might be able to bring it up, but we did have
I can bring it up.
images, or Pam can bring it up. We did have images of those signs and they're similar to the ones that are at the Sweet Alice, in terms of parking signs and also a sign that is, meant to say, what is this place? And
Okay,
so some of these signs are in here already. And I don't know which, example, kiosk and signs, maybe you could try that. So the kiosk is, something on its own that we're asking to have brought back, I believe. But this sign here on the post is 6 feet high, so that's taller than 4 feet high. And this sign here is actually 12 feet square, but we don't know if there is going to be another one. We see one, but if there's another one, that would exceed the 12 square feet that's allowed in the residential zoning district. So we want to be able to accommodate the height that's taller than 4 feet and an area of signs that's more than 12 square feet limit.
okay.
Is a
So
limitation.
would it be accurate to say that the plan for the signs is going to be consistent with what we're seeing on the screen?
Yes, except we don't know. Do we know the locations of these signs? And we also have interpretive signs that are going to be put forward, and we haven't seen those yet. So I think it's a good idea to grant the waiver, but then also to make a condition that the applicant, the town, needs to come back once they have their signs figured out and show where they are and what they look like. Is
Okay,
that fair?
yeah,
Yeah, I would just add, Doug, I'm fine with coming back. I will say on the plan, it does show the new plan that was submitted just recently. It does show the parking area identification sign out near West Pomeroy. And then the kiosk location as well, closer
Okay.
to the trail.
okay, great.
But we're fine with coming back,
Okay, great.
with
You know,
more
I'm,
detail.
I'm not trying to make you come back. I just wasn't clear that we had enough information to know what was going on. It sounds like there is a fair amount of information here, but there may be more signs than we see on this plan.
Mhm.
Okay, I see two hands. Bruce,
I think Joanna was before me.
I was, and then I went off, but then I realized, I'm glad to hear that we're having the conversation about signs. I do remember the conversation from December where we talked about how these signs weren't going to be consistent with the overall signage plan that I think we as a board kind of signed off on in concept for all the conservation areas in town. I remember having that conversation when we were discussing Sweet Alice, that this was going to be kind of the template look of signage in town. And I remember a conversation about the dog park and us wanting to get that signage in conformity with that standard that we had set. So I'm satisfied with the kind of greeting sign and the kiosk sign. And then my one question was, I think I remember from December, Dave walking through the trail plan and demarcating the locations for those signs as well. And so I'm feeling like, I mean, we could maybe check and confirm that those locations are on the map, but I'm satisfied with that and don't feel like I would need the town to come back.
okay. All right, Bruce,
I'm satisfied with granting the waiver now for the parts of it that are in the residential zone. It seems to me very clear that this is not a residential zone, and it also seems to me clear that these kind of uses really depend and need signs, and we ought to be encouraging them. So I would, for that reason, support the waiver now with a view to not having any impediment to having the kind of interpretive signs and having them at the size where they can be seen and appreciated and so forth, and then having the condition that they come back, and then we can be more specific if we choose. But I'm supportive of a waiver for this kind of project where signage is really quite important.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bruce. Janet?
So, would the interpretive, sorry. Would the interpretive signs be very similar to the ones that are, on the trail near my house, Dave? I can't, I'm blanking, the Bluebird Trail. Like, are those the kind of interpretive signs? Because those are excellent. And they're not really that obtrusive.
Um,
Do you know the signs I'm talking about? It's
yes,
right on.
no, I do. I was formulating an answer. Yeah, I mean, they would be similar. I appreciated Johanna's reminder about just about an overall sign plan and consistency. And I think, you know, to be perfectly honest, I think the town has struggled with that. I worked on the dog park and Groff Park and Kendrick Park, and I think we're doing better than we were 5-10 years ago, but I still think we need to do better. To Bruce's point, I think signage or signs, I don't like to use the word signage, but signs are very important for wayfinding, for placemaking, and for interpretation and education. And I will tell you, I can rattle off areas, conservation areas or recreation areas where we have empty kiosks. And when I go there, my blood pressure goes up. So I think we need to do better, and I think we're trying. And I think if we have a standard like you saw earlier with some of those signs, I think that's a step in the right direction. To Janet's question, yes, Janet, I think the interpretive signs, we are really planning. I think an area can have too many signs. I think there's something, I think sign pollution really exists. So we're kind of going on the minimal track here out on Hickory to start off. If we add signs later, that's well and good. But I think most of the signs to begin with will be simple kiosks at trail breaks and smaller signs. But I don't think we will have, I think Bluebird Meadow has something on the order of 5 to 7 signs, something like that, and they're low to the ground, and those are wonderful. We may go to that, but I think initially these will be small kiosks, 2-sided kiosks with trail maps and educational information. Could be information exchange there too. Have you seen this bird or that animal, wildlife sightings, things like that. It is a big place. It really kind of feels very much like Wentworth Farm Conservation Area. It's 150 acres and it feels bigger than that when you get out there. The solar will make it a little smaller, I think, to be honest, once it's fenced and up, but it's a big place. So I think people will want some directional signage, but we don't want to put too many up. They're also very expensive. So budgets will be a real consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Janet and David. Chris?
So Nate might want to bring up the plan of the proposed work because it shows 11 sign locations. And Nate and I were talking about what these signs might look like, and we were thinking that they could look like the Writer's Walk signs, which are very low key and but really manage to, have a lot of information on them. So Park and CDBG proposed grant work is the name of the plan that I'm looking at, but Nate probably knows, or Pam knows which one it is. It's the colorful one.
Was it in this packet, Chris, or 1220?
Yes, it was in this packet. Yeah.
Okay, hold on, I'm in the wrong packet. Here we go.
There's no shortage of maps and plans for Hickory.
Can
So
everybody
this
see
shows
it?
little red
Yes,
squares
yes.
with a person walking and then sort of looking down. And those little red squares represent the signs. And on the loop at the west side or the left side, there are 3 signs. One at location 1, one at location 2, and then one at the first location that Pam pointed out to the right. Right, yes, there's one, yep. And then there's one up along what will be the connector at location 4. There's going to be a sign there. And then along the north-south trail, if you go all the way over to the right side where West Street is, there's going to be a sign at West Street. And one at the end of that drive, number 7, there's going to be a sign there. And if you keep going down along the path, there's going to be a sign right there where someone is pointing. And number 5 also has a sign. And just up to the left from there is another sign. And then I think there are 2 more on the plan right there. And then just to the north. Yeah. So there are, I think I counted 11 altogether. So there are 11 sign locations shown here. And
Would there be a sign at the extreme north of this
Yeah,
trail?
yes, yes, there will.
that is a large kiosk location. So there will be a kiosk there.
Okay,
And there will be a kiosk at the parking lot where you get out of your car and you start onto the trail.
okay,
And there's a star there, and you can see that.
yep.
Yeah,
And to
there.
be honest, some of these, they may change slightly. I don't want to give the board the impression that these are the exact locations, because honestly, you know, we will be navigating wetlands, streams, you know, these, we've looked at those things, but, you know, they may change slightly based on user patterns. If we find people, you know, not using a particular trail or segment of trail, or getting lost at a particular spot, we might move a directional sign north or south or east or west. So I just want to put it out there that these may move slightly. I know in the upper right, you can see the small pond, and there is a sign kind of interpreting that small pond way in the upper central area there, talking about, you know, what wildlife you might see there, reptiles and amphibians that might, you know, live there, those kinds of things. Another sign we planned was to talk about the solar project. What are the benefits of the solar projects? Why is this here? You know, some people are going to be surprised, or some people may not be pleased it's there, a 26-acre solar project, but we'll talk about and we'll work with Pure Sky on some verbiage there to talk about the benefits of solar and what that project brings both to Amherst, but also to Springfield as the off-taker. So.
Okay, great. All right, board members, other comments, other questions for Dave or Nate? And then if there aren't any comments, we will want to know how you feel about these waivers, if there's any objection to the waivers that Chris read, along with the sort of edits that came along with some of the numbers. All right, so I'm still not seeing any hands from the board. Why don't I see if anybody in the public wants to make a comment at this time? So members of the public, this is your chance to comment or pose questions regarding this project at Hickory Ridge. You can speak for up to 3 minutes. Okay, I am not seeing any hands from the public. So we'll come back to the board. Any last comments before we start to try to make some motions? Or Chris, do you want to talk about conditions first?
Yeah, why don't we read through the conditions? And the conditions are listed in the minutes of December 20th. So I don't know if Pam can bring those up, or if Nate can. Pam looks like she's working on it.
Where are they listed on that, in
Oh,
those
the
minutes?
bottom of page 8, that's where they start in the minutes of December 20th.
Oh, okay.
And these minutes had, or these conditions had been circulated to you. I think it was sort of last minute on the day of December 20th, but you had seen them before the meeting and then we talked about them at the meeting. There we go.
Oops.
Yep.
So, thanks, Pam. So the number 1 condition down at the bottom of the page.
Oh, condition, I'm sorry, I was stuck on waivers. Sorry.
Yep.
Yep, there you go.
The project shall be built according to plans approved by the planning board on whatever date you approve them on. The project shall be managed according to the management plan approved by the planning board on, again, whatever date you approve this. Hours of operation shall be from dawn to dusk. Number 4, changes to the project and/or substantial changes to any approved site plans shall be submitted to the planning board for review and approval prior to the work taking place. The purpose of this submittal shall be for the planning board to approve the change and to determine that the changes are de minimis or significant enough to require a modification of the site plan review approval. Number 5. Can you scroll down? Thanks. The proposed shade structure and sign designs shall be submitted to the planning board for review and approval after review by the design review board and prior to installation. And number 6 is the applicant shall obtain a special permit from the zoning board of appeals to locate structures, including shade structures, bridges, and boardwalks within the FPC Flood Prone Conservancy District under section 3.231 of the zoning bylaw prior to construction of these structures. And then we added a last condition during this discussion tonight, which was that the sign plan shall be brought back for review and approval by the planning board prior to installation.
Yeah, I mean, number 5 already refers to sign designs.
Oh, number 5?
Yes.
Number 5, yeah, okay, so is that good enough? You don't need to have them.
I mean,
Should that be a separate?
well, let's see. Bruce, you've got your hand up. You want to weigh in?
Yes, I was going to move approval.
Oh, okay.
But I'll move approval with the number 5 relating to the shade structures and let's say a new number 6 relating to the signs, just for clarity, so that the 2 items are separate and clear. So I would move approval of the application based on the documents submitted, on the waivers and the conditions as reviewed during the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Do you also want to say something about section 11.24? And just acknowledge that the project
Yeah.
meets the relevant criteria of section 11.24 as a finding?
Yeah, we ought to do that. I think I would suggest option 1. So Bruce,
Yes, I'll agree with you, Doug, and I'll and add to the conditions and the findings that the project meets basically, and that the board finds, and then the text of option 1 as part of the motion.
all right.
And close the public hearing.
Yes, thank you. I will do that too. Anybody got a hamburger they want at this point?
It always takes all of us to get through these.
It do. Okay.
Okay,
That's the motion.
And then we're gonna list at least some of those waivers.
We will list the waivers that we talked about in the
yeah.
meeting, which are
So we're down to 8 waivers. lighting plan, traffic impact, 3 sign waivers, 1 parking waiver for section 7.105, the screening comes off. Parking waiver for 7.102 for at least the first 5 feet. Parking waiver for 7.106 for widths between 14.6 and 16.6. So seems like we would want to grant the waivers, impose the conditions, and close the hearing.
And declare the finding.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay.
Bruce made that motion, and
Bruce has made that motion, and now that we've hammered it into shape, Jesse's got his hand up.
I would like to second that motion.
Okay. All right. Is that a little clearer than mud for everybody to understand what we're doing? Mud seems an appropriate metaphor for this project. Okay, so we have a motion, and it's been seconded. Any members of the board want to comment or question or amend that cumbersome motion? Okay, no, I don't see any hands. So in that case, we will do a roll call, I guess, to approve, to make all those actions that that Pam and Chris have conscientiously written down for us. Bruce, you can start.
I approve.
Thank you. Fred,
I approve.
Jesse,
I approve.
Janet,
I approve.
Johanna,
Aye.
Karen,
I approve.
and I'm an I as well. It's unanimous. Again, we're having a unanimous evening. Okay. So Dave, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming back.
Thank
Thanks
you,
to
everybody.
all the
Thank you.
staff that contributed.
Yeah, appreciate all of your time and your input. And this will be, as I said, this will be kind of phase 1, and we will be back before you in the future. And as I said, also, we're hoping to have many of these trails done this summer, at least phase 1 of the trails. So we'll keep you posted and watch on social media and other media sources for updates on that. So thank you very much.
What's the schedule for the solar?
The solar is going to be back on track. They just moved forward on a next step with the Conservation Commission. So you will see a lot. We will see if you're out on Hickory on the informal trails today and in the weeks and months ahead, you'll see the solar project get back on track. They'll begin to clear the trees, which were felled some months ago. Improve the road, the bridge access, and then they'll get going with the construction itself. So summer 24 is going to be a very busy summer at Hickory Ridge. You'll see a lot of activity. So we're going to have to manage the public. That will be one of our challenges, is keeping everybody safe and also keeping some of the rare wildlife that makes its home out in Hickory safe as well. So a lot of traffic cops out there this summer, making sure people and turtles and other wildlife in the stream and in the Fort River and on the land are kept safe. So
Okay,
thank
thank
you
you
all.
very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so the time now is 7:20. Guess we can go on to the next item on our agenda. Item 4, University Drive Potential Housing Overlay District. So let's see, I
Nate is
know
the
there were,
host for this one.
what's that?
I said Nate is the spokesperson for this one.
Nate's the spokesperson, okay. So Nate, do you want to introduce it? I know you printed some comments the different members of the board had made and such in the packet.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, and there were some other comments. Janet Keller had sent some in, and Susanna Musprat had sent some, I think, were forwarded. Yeah, I mean, I think Bruce had provided a nice summary. We could walk through that in a minute. It's been a little while since we looked at this. He had provided some ideas where we had consensus and what needs to be worked on. I think and the geographic boundaries is another one. I think, after the last time we spoke about this in person, my thoughts are that we would consider this maybe like a housing and economic development overlay. And so, kind of starting with kind of the bigger purpose, it seemed like a lot of planning board members wanted to also try to keep ground floor or, a significant amount of space for non-residential use, as we call it in our mixed use building standard. And so, I think, just hearing that, my thought would be that, the title of the overlay would kind of convey that, and then the purpose and goals of it would also have that. So, to me, that's where the planning board seemed like it was heading, right? It's not like we're just going to kind of put apartments in here and really try to lose any commercial, retail, or other space. And so, I think that's something that we could discuss in terms of the purpose, and then also kind of the types of housing. In Doug's comments, there was some concern, and some of the others about the size and scale of the buildings, the massing, what the streetscape looks like. And so, I think that's also part of the discussion. It kind of, to me, it's, just want to make sure we work down to that level first. So, what I like to see is that Service Drive on the west side, like I said, becomes a pedestrian corridor. We keep the street trees, and the setbacks respond to the conditions along University Drive and then Amity and whatever, what other streets may be involved. And so that the west side setback might be, 15 or 20 feet, whatever it takes to have that, the street trees in the corridor. And then on the east side, it might be a different setback. And so, it's really going to be something where, the dimensional standards or certain things might be kind of qualified based on their location in the overlay. So it could be that, the east side has some things that are different than the west side, depending on, setbacks or character of that. And so I think that'll be important. I will say that, this is to try to encourage development down here. Susanna had mentioned in her letter that, we could try to, we'd always said we'd like to present this to UMass. I don't think that this is like a one-for-one bargaining chip, but I think that, the UTAC had identified this area as a place for looking at redevelopment and some other areas close to campus. And, I think this is something that we could show them and say, I don't think we can ink a partnership or an agreement, but, I think we could encourage them. I think looking at pedestrian access up to the northern part of University Drive into campus is important. Biking, and so my thought is if this becomes an area where there is some development, and we can really work on that connection to the university. Yeah, and so I don't know if we would want to just take comments from the board, Doug, or if you want to, I could pull up a map or something. Spend a little.
Well, the comments that I sent to you and Chris were really intended to sort of help inform you as you drafted something more, more definitive for the board to react to. So I guess my first question is that a realistic expectation on my part that you would have time to in fact draft something? Or are we going to be relying on one or more board members to essentially go away and do something and then come back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that after this meeting, we can start putting more, pen to paper. I think, I feel like there hasn't been enough of a consensus, I guess kind of around the purpose and goals and other things to really start doing that. I feel like in general, the board seemed like, yeah, this is a place for redevelopment, but really what is the goals of that? Is there certain styles of housing or types of housing or density we're looking for? And so I think, yeah, I think having that kind of conversation tonight will help us.
Okay. All right. All right, great. So Janet, you've got your hand up.
So I agree with Nate that we need to talk about it more and get sort of clear on the goals and the concepts and the different ideas. And then it might be good to go through Bruce's, summary or compilation, and then maybe talk about next steps. Which, putting pen to paper for what, and so I have some ideas of next steps that we could do, but it makes more sense to me to talk about it towards the end.
Okay, Karen?
I talked about this whole project with a relative that I was with over the holidays, who's a planner in Oregon, Eugene, Oregon. And I described University Drive and a lot of the potential. And she alerted me, she said, first of all, I would be careful of making too many regulations, such as requiring the first floor or the ground floor to be retail and commercial. She said, unless you're ready to have a lot of empty spaces, because in her experience, she said, and we've seen that, that is just a hard sell right now. And if you leave it open, it's much better. So she said, what you want to do is leave this to the designers to make a streetscape that's very welcoming and open and attractive, and kind of let the market determine what really goes in there. For example, it's much better to have maybe a dentist or a real estate broker or someone with an office use it that might not qualify for something. So to be careful about the regulations. And then the other thing that she said is, so why are you limiting it to, did we say, we've been talking about potentially 5 stories. And I said, well, that's kind of an aesthetic thing, but she said, this is also something that the markets should play a role in. So they were just things that kind of opened my mind to what we were discussing, all of our requirements. We should really be careful, I think, in what we do. And yeah, I agree. Let's go through what we have consensus of and go from there.
Okay. All right, anybody else want to make any comments before we walk through Bruce's document from December 4th, I believe? Okay, Nate, do you want to take the lead, or?
Sure, yeah. I just had to share my screen. A good story about Eugene, Oregon, like years ago, when I was in high school, I was looking at driving across country, and a friend who had done it years before in his atlas, circled different places, and in Eugene, he highlighted and he said, really good pot. My mom was like, oh, okay. I'm like, I guess, that's what he highlighted every place across the country that had good marijuana. It's pretty funny. Is that visible for everyone?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, Karen, I think someone else, well, I think the number of stories is really important. I just wanted to say, I had said less than 5. You said more than 5. Some people have said 5. And so I think that goes to the density. And so, here's Bruce's sheet, and it seemed like consensus was 5 stories, but I think that's maybe something we would revisit. Yeah, I don't know. When I drive around and I look at what is 5 stories now, it's a pretty tall building. And so I think that's something we could discuss. And I can, this is a Word document, so I could type as we need to. So, I mean, number 1 is a preference for mixed use, specifically requiring commercial retail on the first floor. And so we don't have a, it's not, I don't know if it's like all of the first floor or it's only mixed use. At one point we had said, could mixed use buildings be site plan review and apartments be special permit? So it kind of incentivizes mixed use. I think in Amherst, the market is so heavily weighted to housing that if we said, we'll let the market decide, I think we would see just a lot of apartments and not a lot of anything else. So I understand what you're, what you're saying. It's just, it's hard to, to me, the market's a little different, unique in each spot. I think it'd be hard to say, oh, let's just figure it out. I'm not sure we'd see a lot of mixed use otherwise. I think some developers might, right? I think some might, some owners might, but others might not.
Yeah. I know in my comments, I'd said maybe just limit it to 30 feet depth from the front facade. But I see 4 sets of hands here, so why don't we, that looks like a lot of comment on this. Karen, you're first.
I'm sorry, I left my hand up.
Okay, Janet.
So I sort of envision this as 4 stories. I think 5 stories we kind of lose the vibe of Amherst, and the buildings that are most disliked in town are these kind of very big, bulky 5-story buildings. And so I in my mind, I thought if there's a 5th story, there has to be some extra benefit, right? So there has to be something, maybe we require them to be condos to create more like owned housing, not just always rental housing. Maybe we require some community amenity on the 1st floor, like community space, or build, a park or some, outside space that everybody can use. And then I had this this law school thing in my head of slippery slope. So when I saw 100 units per apartment, I thought, well, if you're allowing it here, why wouldn't you allow it in other parts of town? If you say 5 stories on University Drive, or 6 or 7 or 10, why wouldn't it be everywhere else? And so I was very conscious of, like, I would stick with the mixed use building, which allows you to do as many units as you want. But the idea is, you're sort of building a shopping, living area. People can walk to stores, there's a park, they can get to UMass, which is our largest employer. They can jump on a bus to Northampton and go work there. So I think this idea of heights and, the density is just a hot, really difficult issue in our town, which is kind of why later my suggestion for next steps is, like, let's take that to stakeholders and see, like, we have a vision, we have questions about heights and density. What do you guys think, kind of thing? But I do think, it's like, it does seem like, and mixed use commercial could be a preschool on the 1st floor. Like, I keep on thinking, I'm obsessed with the north part of Mass Ave in Cambridge, because I have been driving it for, I don't know how many years, 40 years now. And over time, you see, like, there's a beer store, there's several preschools, there's an Indian clothes store, there's lots of different food stuff, and they're all small, they're all very, easy. They're not very big buildings usually, and people, throng them, and they seem to thrive. So I do think the heights issue is really tough.
All
And
right.
it needs to be sort of a community decision. So.
All right. Thanks, Janet. Jesse.
I mostly agree with what Janet said. A couple comments and one question, really. Comment on the height. At one point, we had talked about 5 stories, but maybe requiring not 5 stories in the facade, like a setback after some number of stories as a possibility, so that it's not just a total 5-story front. I think I also agree with the last thing Nate said about, if we let the market entirely decide, it would be largely apartments and not commercial. And to me, that's not desirable, because in 10 years, the market might be different. And then there's only apartments on the 1st floor. So I feel like if we don't try and encourage that now, it's not going to come back as mixed use without significant efforts at that point. And is it better to be not empty? I'm not sure. And my question relates to the buildings in town. What was the requirement there? We talked in the past about how the protocol spot stayed empty for X number of years. How the other, was it Prudential who's in there, is not really attractive commercial space. But I don't know what the requirement was on those buildings. Maybe one of you can educate me on that. Was that commercial space mandated by zoning? It was. Jan's shaking her head.
Yeah. I don't know about Kendrick, but all of 3 of those buildings were classified as mixed use buildings. So there had to be some commercial space in them. And I think the most recent building that's just getting finished was permitted under our current zoning, which required something like 30% of the first floor area to be commercial or to be non-residential. And I don't actually know about the previous two buildings, but Chris, you've got your hand up. Maybe you can remember for One East Pleasant and Kendrick Place.
Yeah, there wasn't any requirement. It was just some of the building needed to be non-residential. And so in some cases, we ended up with very small spaces, not in those buildings along North Pleasant Street or East Pleasant Street, but in other parts of town, we ended up with, you know, a space of 200 square feet being considered the mixed use. So now we have criteria in place. It is 30% of the first floor. So that's, you know, any building that's coming forward now needs to adhere to that unless we change that for this overlay zoning district.
Okay,
And if I can make one last comment on that,
sure. Jeff.
and I think Nate mentioned this at the last time we spoke on this project, was ways to encourage potential for smaller commercial spaces. So like you mentioned, requiring doors every so often on the first floor and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I'm really in favor of that as well. Trying to not let it be one big commercial space.
Yeah, maybe a door every 30
ways we
feet.
can do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. First Bruce and then Johanna.
Doug, I initially put my hand up as Nate started reading this list and then commenting immediately, and then of course everybody's hands went up, and I the reason that I wrote this was because I thought we could avoid having to have the whole bloody discussion all over again. And so I was immediately quite frustrated because I thought that the thing would be to what extent do we agree that these items are consensus? We could take comments purely on the basis of whether we agree with them, because the intent was to continue to discuss stuff that we hadn't got to previously. My fear was being that we'll just go through the items of apparent consensus, and by the time we get to 9 o'clock, we'll be right back where we started from. So that was what I put my hand up. But I guess I should ask: is my concern everybody else's concern? Because if it isn't, then my concern doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, I can say that I hoped we'd get farther than this document tonight.
Yeah.
So sure, I mean, you know, it felt like we were pretty much in consensus with the things that you talked about. But,
well, then let me just say the other thing that that I could put my hand up for, if it wasn't to just to make sure we were not stepping into a rabbit hole we didn't want to step in, and so it seems like it's not a rabbit hole, and it's okay. So therefore, continuing in the vein, I think it's worth mentioning again, because it was mentioned last time. There's a reason for 5 stories, and it relates to our mass building code. And so this is not an arbitrary thing. The first floors are typically built for a different use, which we've talking about mandating, which would be a retail, commercial, or some kind of use. There will be a concrete slab separating that from the upper stories, which if you build then the cheaper wood frame construction, you can build, I think, 3 stories. And if you use sprinkler systems, then you can get the 4th above the first. That adds to 5. There's a pretty sound logic that says not just that we like 5, but that the way the building codes are structured, there's a strong economic driver to that number, in conjunction with a requirement for a commercial use on the first floor.
Yeah,
Let's
also
keep that in mind.
You get more stories out of your elevator.
You do too.
And you're not high enough that you're a high-rise building, which has a new set of requirements. And
if we do have 5, as has been mentioned, the top floor could be set back. Janet and I had a conversation earlier in the day, I think, where we were talking about what would be in the latter part, after the stuff we haven't consented on, which was in return for offering the owners of these parcels this kind of upzoning, which clearly increases the developable potential of their lots, which clearly is an economic benefit to them, what can we get back? And one of the things that we thought, or I thought, or Janet thought might be a clawback, that's not the word, but a quid pro quo, was that that we might want to have a mix of for sale units and rental units. It's possible that we could ask for that. And if we were to ask for that, then stepping back the top floor might be a good way of doing that, because the step back would create open terrace space, which is probably going to create a higher, particularly with elevators, a higher cost, higher value apartment or residential product or products which would be more likely to perhaps be sold. So there feels like there could be a synergy here around the 5 stories and the requirements, a design guideline type requirement that the upper story, in the interest of streetscape scale, be set back, and as I said, providing opportunities for another requirement that we might ask as a quid pro quo for allowing this upzoning.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. I mean, I guess we don't typically get into ownership and mixed ownership in an apartment building. I mean, as a consumer or as somebody who could buy a condo, I guess I'd be a little bit leery of, being a tiny little percentage of a big apartment building that had predominantly one owner. I guess it's also possible that that one owner could just buy all the condos and rent them out, in which case you haven't solved or advanced your objective.
Yeah, I don't know whether that is an objective. I'm just saying that we in consideration of things that we want, and it might be, the question was, is the town threatened with an oversupply of, or a higher fraction of rental accommodations than it feels appropriate? That's a question. I don't know the answer to that, but it's possibly a question that we should ask. And depending on the answer, we might be looking for ways in which we can stimulate ownership, condominium type ownerships in these structures.
Right.
That's all.
Okay. All right. And I assume one of the objectives is to build more housing in town.
Oh, yes, that's pretty clearly the objective.
Okay. Janet.
So, the 2 items on this list, I agree with Bruce in terms of, I agree with almost all of them. We hash it. Except that the 2 items for me were a question of heights, and if it's like, so do we want to be there at high, or do we want to be higher? The other one that really, I think I'd love to pull off the consensus list, and it could be a separate thing, is the parking. Like, I would not move into a building where there was a half parking space for me. And so if you want to encourage working people that don't work at UMass or family housing, and there's not enough places to park a car, and I don't know anybody, I know, very few people who have families who don't have cars, and often multiple cars. So I don't feel like the parking necessarily has to be at the building, but there has to be enough parking in the area, not just for commercial use, but also for people to use. And so I think, if we could pull how much parking is needed maybe off the consensus list, and this is actually something we could talk to UMass about, is, maybe they have space for parking, during like down by their, what do you call it, their stadium, which is almost always empty, or maybe they would be their, plans for a parking lot if they're planning to develop University Drive. We might say to a developer, you don't have to put parking on site, but you have to contribute to a municipal parking fund, and we'll, for building a parking garage in that area. Maybe there's a deal to cut with Big Y, who is not using their spaces at night. But I do think that, half a car per apartment, which could be 2 or 3 bedroom, is going to knock out most families. And so if we're trying to find housing where people could rent or buy and live, I think we just have to accept that there's at least 1 car per household. maybe they don't always have to use it, but I find it really difficult to believe that many families can really function in the valley unless they just want to live along a bus line and, you know, their doctors and hospital and everything has to be there.
Okay. Well, this is a minimum, so, you know, the developer could recognize that people need more parking and propose some too. Karen,
Yeah, basically, I agree with Bruce and Janet on this too, and I didn't want to necessarily start all over again. I do like the idea of mixed use. I like the idea of encouraging housing for multiple kind of constituents, students, as well as Susanna Muskrat said in her letter, there's a real need for people that want to live here to be able to perhaps buy. This is new to me, but you know, I actually, we have an apartment in Berlin, which is exactly like that. It's owned by people, but the ground floor is commercial. And just about the whole city where the commercial things are that way. The apartments above them are not just rental, they're owned, and it makes for an incentive of having really a mixed group of people that live there. So, and the fact that you would then maybe have it be a place which has a kind of open terrace in the front would also perhaps, from a design point of view, really help to make this an attractive thing. So yes, I didn't want to revisit that, but I thought it was certainly worth zeroing in that the height thing is very important.
okay, thanks, Karen. Nate,
Yeah, you know, and I think it's important to talk about some of these. I agree. I was hoping to move a little bit along, you know, and I was going to mention in terms of parking. I mean, ideally, I would have no parking requirement here, and you let the developer decide if whatever they want to. You know, a developer is not going to build a 100-unit building and have no parking if they think their tenants want parking or the occupants want parking. And so, you know, to me, this minimum is, you know, a nod to having some parking, but ideally it'd be no, I'd have no requirement. I think, you know, again, going back to the market in Amherst, you know, does that mean then it becomes, you know, students because they don't have cars? And so, you know, there's different ways to try to back into this, but, you know, we have other requirements. We could have other requirements in terms of open space or amenities or, you know, certain things. And so, you know, I think as a minimum requirement, I think it's fine. I mean, often now in the zoning, we allow for a waiver if, you know, if an applicant can justify it. I mean, so I could go down this list. I do think, you know, mixed use is important. I guess the question really is, how much do we require of, you know, for that? You know, and is that something we go beyond? You know, we can go to the next level here. So we agree mixed use is important. We, you know, we want to build some taller buildings, and then, you know, really, which we can start to look at is, say, items down here, because, you know, I will say that for this part of town, whether or not it's 3 or 5 or 6 stories, whatever it is, I think there's some ability to have density here and have it work. I think we have a pretty wide streetscape. We can have some wide setbacks, and I think height can be managed here, you know, more strategically than in other parts of town or other village centers. And so, you know, if we are really talking about trying to have housing opportunity, you know, this area has been identified by a few different studies as a place where we could have quite a bit of density. And so you know, I wouldn't want to miss that opportunity with the thought that other parts of town then could be examined for, you know, different types of housing. And so, you know, this is one piece in a larger kind of solution.
okay, thanks, Nate. Karen, your hand is still up?
No,
So I was going to just jump in. So items for consensus. I think the boundary is one we could talk about. You know, here, when I just asked that, you know, specific fraction of the first floor designated as commercial or retail, a cap or no cap on the number of apartment units, and then, you know, some subsidy or something for to incentivize non-residential space. And in the packet, I had shown a new boundary eliminating the property north of Amity. There's just one. It was originally included because it is actually zone BL, so it's a just to be consistent with that. And then I removed Hawkins Meadow and the auto repair shop, but I kept in the properties around the intersection. And so, I think that is something we can continue to discuss, is the boundary.
Yeah, that looks like it reflects some of the comments from last time.
Right.
And then I had a comment that I mentioned earlier about the fraction of the first floor. I proposed a cap on the number of apartment units just to try to keep the buildings from getting too big, and to try to have multiple buildings that probably, will give you a variety of facade treatments and materials, so that you don't end up with some of those really long facades like some of the images that you showed for us last fall. And then I'm not quite sure I understand your rental subsidy. It seemed like if one developer builds the building and it's got commercial space on the first floor and they know it's going to be vacant for a while, or that the market won't pay them the full cost of building it, the subsidy is going to be kind of built into their economic model. It's kind of what I assume. And so I'm not quite sure how something else would work. Nate?
I actually don't understand number 4. Like,
Janet, why don't you raise your hand? Bruce
Sorry.
is next.
sorry.
Yeah, I was going to defer to Bruce. I think, the planning board I talked about, are there ways to, have, say, smaller commercial spaces, as opposed to if we require a percentage, would someone just have a huge, vacuous space that they don't really care about filling, exactly as you said, Doug, because they're subsidizing it through the residential component. And so, are there ways to try to encourage different types of, first floor use? And so, I'll say I haven't researched this a lot. I've looked at it a little bit. I think it's really difficult, but I think that's really what this is talking about, is how do we, try to get the spaces we might want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, Bruce, you're next.
Yes, I put this in because I think I said it, and others may have. I realized at the time that it was difficult to imagine how this would work. And of course, one of the reasons why it isn't in the consensus bunch is because it wasn't broadly supported, or perhaps even understood. But I think I agree with you, Doug, and that this is something that would be too difficult to put into any regulatory language. So we should, and as you said, it may well be taken care of by the marketplace anyway. So,
Well, you could try to guide the architecture and require a public entry door every, 25 or 30 feet, so that they can come back and subdivide when they finally get desperate enough to split it up and have small enterprises.
yes.
Space.
Well, that's a better way of saying it. The number 4, as it stands here, talks about requiring some form of rental subsidies. That's the part that I think our regulatory structures are too blunt to be able to do that. And I think if we try, the bluntness turns into, it'll be unwieldy. And so I would suggest that we don't pursue this, or don't try and pursue this, other than what Nate has been typing below about the making sure it's possible to subdivide the ground floor structures. That's a good idea, I think.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Janet, you're on.
I think I understand number 4 a little better. I would, in terms of the overlay boundary, I wouldn't take any residential homes. And so, University Drive South, part of it extends into, what is now a commercial and a mixed use building. So that makes sense to include it, although I don't think they're going to want to redevelop it to higher. I wouldn't go across the street and take those homes. I think, we should just leave the RN alone and just focus on, the bulk of the thing. I think, pushing out the commercial is gonna be upsetting to people living along that street. I'm sure they all want to come and shop there, but not sure that they're gonna want to see their homes taken over, or, people along Snell Street will be, they're next to a quiet veterinary, they're next to University Drive South. They can get their eyes checked, they can walk across the street if they're lucky and go shop, but I don't think they want to see that all come at them. And maybe they do, and if we do some stakeholder meetings, people will be crying for that. But I just think let's leave the RN alone and not take any residential houses and really just focus on these open lots. The other suggestion I have, if we go back to that list of, I've lost my list on my desk, is just 2 pieces of information. When we picked the 30% of mixed use for commercial space on the first floor for mixed use, that was the lowest percentage of any town that we looked at. And so we should think maybe it could be bigger. And then I think, I can't remember who rejected this. I can't remember if it was town council or CRC or the old planning board. I think it was the town council. They didn't want to allow apartment buildings in the downtown because they were afraid that people would just build apartments and we'd lose that kind of commercial retail, kind of lively street and shopping. So I think that, we should just stay with mixed use. It can let you put as many units as you want in the building, but we need to keep that kind of vital, kind of urbanish feeling, or, this is a street that you can do a lot of things at. So I would say just skip no apartment buildings allowed. And then if you do, and you're allowing 100 units, there's a cap on everywhere else in town of 24 units. And so again, I think people were saying, well, why can't we do that here? And anyway, that's it.
All right.
It's a lot.
I guess I'll just say I disagree with you about the parcels south of Route 9. And, in terms of consistency with other parts of town, we can be inconsistent between different parts of town. It's not, they're geographically different. They have different roadway systems. They're in different proximities. So I wouldn't be constrained by that. Jesse and then Nate.
Thanks. 2 different topics. One, Janet touched on the boundary, and you just commented on also, Doug. I think I agree more with Janet that I don't see the need right now to include the residential houses that are there already. I think the boundary is pretty clean just on the north side of Northampton Road. I did want to comment on the commercial use. Can we go back to that list? Can you back up one, Nate, to the text? So I totally appreciate what Bruce was saying about the difficulty in trying to encourage the different types of commercial space. But I think anything we think could work, we should do. I'm very much in favor of really encouraging that mixed use first floor. And I'm thinking more about 10 years from now when the demographic might be different according to all analyses than in 3 to 5 years when they get filled, assuming these get built.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. Nate.
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing. I think I'll go back again. The residential pieces, I think this is where, tailoring setbacks or dimensional standards to different pieces of the overlay could work. So if if we want to keep a buffer here, we could have different side or rear setbacks and really encourage development along the street and on the corner here. And so, that's the thought, to include these. It really creates an anchor point on this corner. And so, I think it could be a missed opportunity. There is wetlands and possible some other things here, so there could be limited development, but really, we could have some setbacks or dimensional standards to encourage development along the street there. And then in terms of, yeah, the apartments, I think, Doug, capping the number of units to me is tricky, because you could have, an apartment building with 100 studios, or an apartment building with, 3 and 4 bedroom units. And so the number of beds, or the actual, the occupancy is drastically different. And you had mentioned it, and I think we could say it, that if we want to regulate facade length, maybe we just say it, that, a facade over 80 feet in length needs to have a step back of 10 or 15 feet, or a break in something, and that has to be clear to the sky, or have I think there's probably ways we could
Okay.
do that. I think that trying to cap units is really interesting. I feel like the market changes, so the cap, it's really the number of beds can vary. But I understand what you're saying. No one liked the stores images where, it was just a wall of 5 stories, and, you could tell that it was really all maybe, concurrent development, and there wasn't really any relief in the architecture. And so, it is different when you have one building with some open space, and then another building, and it, as opposed to something that is just really reads as a wall. And so,
Yeah.
and I think, we're working with Dodson and Flinker. Hopefully that will become a little bit more active in February. We're asking them to look at things like that. I think we could have a few of the kind of standards here if this were to move faster, and then apply what they come up with, here as well. And so, but I don't want to put this out there and have, some way that we're missing something, like, oh, all of a sudden we have a 200-foot long building that's just really massive.
Right. Okay. Johanna.
All right, thank you. I'm really appreciating tonight's discussion. And I had a couple of thoughts. The first is that we likely won't get to consensus on all these provisions. And so there's part of me that is interested in starting to figure out what are the things that the majority of us agree on. And maybe it makes sense to chunk it out, and let's see if we can, get to a larger proposal. And then, we'll have an up or down vote on that. And then and I think I appreciated what Bruce put together as like proposed consensus things. I think there are still some things there that probably need to move back into the discussion topic. But on one of the things that's currently in the discussion topic I wanted to address was the boundary. And I spoke to this in our last meeting. But the way I see it, coming back to our overall goal, we want to add housing and increase vitality in this part of town. And the smaller we make it, the fewer opportunities we create to do that. And so I would be interested in keeping the scope of like opportunity bigger. I see intersections as really like important nodes. And when I look at, in particular, the properties that are kind of closest to town, there are, I believe, 2, and this, I'm talking about Route 9. Nate, I don't know if you can bring up the map, but there are 2 houses. They're not in great shape. And then there's a property right next to the bike path. And to me, that's just like, I just see tremendous opportunities to accomplish our goals of creating more housing and doing it in a way that minimizes driving by leveraging the bike path. And I just think it's a shame if we leave that on the table.
Johanna, are those properties within the boundary now or outside of it?
As drawn, they're in the boundary. So they're those, on the lower part of the drawing, the 2 purple
Okay.
boundaries right by Snell and University.
Yeah, so she's talking about these 3 right here.
Yeah.
That's visible.
Okay. Good.
Thanks.
All right, yeah, I was also thinking there may be questions like the boundary that we should just have a straw poll on right now and see where people are at, and then Nate knows how to proceed.
Doug?
Janet, you're next.
No, Bruce has dropped out of the meeting and can't get back in. He just called me. So
Oh,
I just
okay.
missed, I'm sorry, Johanna, I missed what you said. So,
There he is. Looks like he's coming back.
is he coming back? He said he tried all the links and it didn't work.
Here he is.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened, but I haven't been here for 10 minutes.
Oh,
Oh,
Bruce.
We said-
Okay.
Okay, don't worry. I'm back. We'll forget
Well,
about it.
I guess you can watch the video.
I could.
Well, let's see. The time is 10 after 8. So if you start watching about 90 minutes in, that's be about the point where you cut out. All right. Let's see. I see 3 more hands here. It is almost 10 after 8. So if we want to take a break, we can do that whenever people are ready. I realize Bruce just took a break. So for Jesse, you are next.
Thanks. Just one more thought about this boundary and that corner spot. And Nate, I totally appreciate what Nate said about it's a possibility for sort of gateway entering Amherst. And I think that's actually the objection I'm having. So when I think about town currently, and if you drive up the hill to enter Amherst at the main intersection versus entering Amherst from the north or from UMass, it's a very different experience right now because of the newer buildings. Right? Coming in from UMass versus coming in from Northampton Road. And I would like to keep the character of coming in from Northampton Road, meaning it's a lower scale, smaller town, the way the planning board and the town has kept the town until these bigger buildings. And I would not be in favor of having, okay, you enter Amherst, and then we have on every corner a Kendrick Place type building as what your first impression of town is. And I kind of like that this potential new zone is not a direct required experience as you come into town. It's sort of tucked away off Northampton Road, and you're going there with intention. So I just wanted to share that thought on that boundary question.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. Janet and then Chris.
So Jesse, I'm glad you said that because when I drive through Hadley and Route 9, I find it unbelievably depressing. And it's just all this strip development. It reminds me of everything I left behind in Long Island. And then when I hit that intersection and go up the hill, I start feeling good. And it's like, it's just, you're back in New England. It's a beautiful town. And that's where I start to enjoy, getting off or that part I enjoy Route 9. So I do think it's kind of, to fill that up with other development is just extending that kind of strip zone. I would love to think it's a beautiful new building going in. I just haven't seen much of that is appealing to me. So I would like to keep that feeling. I think it says like you're in Amherst, even though you kind of have been in Amherst for a while. The other thing I worry about in that intersection is traffic. That's like a really crummy intersection to make a left-hand turn. Like if you're ever going to put in a very small rotary, that would be it. And I think that putting, people pulling in and out on the other side of the road and then people pulling into the medical area, it's just going to become another area of congestion and cars pulling in and out at every spot, which when you're on Route 9, you really have enough of that. And so I would say just leave that there for now, maybe add it later if you had some great design standards in the buildings, get you a feeling like, oh, we're in New England again, not in some strip development in anywhere USA.
All right. Thanks, Janet. Chris?
I was strangely enough going to say exactly what Jesse and Janet just said. I really appreciate driving along Route 9, coming to that intersection, and then driving up the hill and having it be a starkly different experience. Whatever happens to those little houses, I don't know in the future, but I think it's really, it's a lovely way of entering Amherst, even though those buildings aren't all kept up as well as they could be. And, providing a place where you can have density in 5-story buildings along University Drive, I think is a great idea. But trying to, at least, for the next little while, preserving that entry into Amherst is really something that a lot of people appreciate. That's all.
Okay. All right, thanks, Chris. Not seeing any more hands at the moment. Shall we take a 5-minute break? Seeing a few heads nod. Okay. So the time, at least on my clock, is 8:12. Let's come back at 8:17. Please mute and turn off your camera while you're away. All right, my clock says 8:17. If anybody's behind the black screens wants to turn their camera back on. All right, we still need Fred and Nate. Lost Bruce.
I'm here. I'm just eating my ice cream. I won't be a moment. Well, I'm listening.
Okay. All right, yeah, stop making me hungry for ice cream.
I'll share my screen, Doug, just so that Nate doesn't think you're waiting for me rather than him. And then I'll go back to eating my ice cream when Nate arrives.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah. Well, I would like to wait for Nate to come back. Chris, would it make sense for us to tick off a couple of our later agenda items before Nate comes back? You are muted.
Sorry, I said sure, that he may be dealing with some family thing.
Okay,
Could we
Sorry.
defer those to next week? Because we're gonna meet again in a week, right?
Yes, we are.
yeah, that's true. Well, it shouldn't take long. I mean,
True.
you know, do we have any old business that's not reasonably anticipated?
All business.
No old business. Do we have any new business that's not anticipated?
No new business.
Do we have any Form A and R subdivision applications?
No.
No.
So
And
looking
about ZBA applications?
I have nothing new to share.
Okay. Any SPP, SPR, and SUB applications?
There are things coming in, but we haven't received them yet, so we don't like to talk about them until we actually receive them.
Right, okay. All right,
But I will tell you that the town council is going to be going back and looking at Amherst Hills. So this is in a matter of a subdivision. Amherst Hills has finally been finished, and they are coming to have the town accept their roads. And so town council will be considering that on Monday night. And we believe that town council will be referring that acceptance to the planning board, which has a role in accepting roadways. So the planning board will be needing to talk about this at one of its upcoming meetings. And you have 45 days from the referral to make a recommendation to town council as to whether you think that the roadways should be accepted or not. And so just wanted to make that announcement. We also have a request from the Meadows, from the residents of the Meadows, but that is not in as clear a situation. So there will be more to be said about that, but for now, I think Amherst Hills is in good shape.
okay, all right, great. So we ticked off, oh, maybe 5 items there. Nate, welcome back. We jumped ahead and just went through a few of the routine items in our agenda while you were away. So, do you want to bring up, or should we bring up Bruce's list again? Or, you know, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the items that were yet to be discussed. I know I threw out some dimensions and things in my email to you, but we really haven't had a conversation about most of them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could talk about the boundary, I think, a little bit more. It sounds like there's some discussion there. You know, I think the map was hard to read. I was just going to mention that those residential properties are in the RN zoning district. And, you know, I think I agree that there is some point where Route 9 transitions. It seems like at that intersection where it becomes more residential or different scale and character as you're coming up the hill. You know, is it okay though that corner could be something different? Or, you know, if this was part of the overlay, you know, we could incentivize, say, townhouses or something other than apartments, right? Something that's not, say, allowed in RN at some density. And so it could be that, you know, we get kind of specific in this area and we, you know, we could do something, we could, you know, we can, I don't want to say we can do whatever we want, but we could, you know, try to incentivize things here that instead of a 5-story building, right, we could have like a sub area of this overlay. So, but I think that's, you know, I think the boundary is important. I had the property map pulled up. You know, the other area is now 1 University Drive South. So, you know, it's in the PRP zone. I mean, is it worth it to keep it in the overlay? It's already been recently developed. There's the 5 College Realtors across the street. That's, you know, it's in a residential building, but it's used as an office space. And then there's, you know, the Ginger Garden there. So, you know, I think the zoning, I will say that the zoning, we're trying to, you know, with the zoning, we're providing opportunity for things to happen. It's not as if it, you know, we're not requiring it. So I do think that if, say, this were an overlay, I do think that some of the property owners would redevelop. You know, I think that there's been, you know, since this discussion has started a few months ago, some property owners have asked the town, and I think there would be some interest. You know, that might be a few properties. That could be, you know, 3 or 4 properties. And it could be a start, but it, you know, it doesn't mean that it'll happen, you know, right away. And so, you know, I think for the boundary, we could always change it, but I think that is a point I'd like to just, try to work on, because I think that if we feel comfortable with the boundary and kind of the purpose, I was typing notes up top saying, expand housing opportunity, a live, work, shopping area, encourage mixed uses, if those are kind of some broader goals. And then, if we can say, okay, here's the area we want that to happen in, and then we can start going down, Doug, on that list. And so I don't know if I can pull up the map again and.
Well, do you want to just get a straw poll on whether to go south of Route 9 or not?
Yeah, I think that would be a good one.
All right. All right, so I guess I do see Janet and Karen's hands. Are your comments concerning this boundary issue? So Karen, you're saying yes. So go ahead and say something.
I just have a question. Is it, I mean, this is something that could, I so agree with Jesse and Janet in, we want to encourage, vitality, but we also are trying to preserve the character of our town and the approach to our town. And I'm just wondering, this boundary does, if we leave that out, that corner, is that not something we can come back to easily? I mean, wouldn't it be just safer to just not do that now and wait and develop that later?
Well, I think the answer is sure, we can come back later. For any of this to happen, it would need to go through town council and probably CRC. And so it's not a completely simple thing to have any of this happen. And the more times we chip away at it, just the more time it takes on other meeting agendas.
And so
Okay.
I was gonna, if we, we eliminate everything south of Route 9, I guess the question would, sorry, I don't know if you can hear the dog barking, or the other, here's 5 College Realtors right here. And so do we, eliminate something along here? And so I think, to me, that would be 2 parts, south of the Route 9 and also this area.
Okay. All right, so why don't I just start by asking about south of Route 9. So maybe let's use our raise hand functions here. Members of the board, if you are in favor of the boundary extending south of Route 9, please raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like we have only 2 members who are in favor of that, Nate. So we probably have 5 who are opposed to that. Okay, we can put our hands down.
Doug, if I may interrupt, I wouldn't have put my hand up for either option because I don't feel strongly either way.
Okay. Okay, so then how many members would support including the area that Nate has outlined in blue that's north of Route 9 with the real estate office and maybe one other property? So if you are in favor of including that, please raise your hand. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 members, 5 members in favor and 1 member, 2 members opposed. All right, thank you. We can put our hands down. All right, Nate, so that gives you some feedback. It looks like there's very weak support for going south of Route 9, and there's pretty substantial support for going all the way to Route 9. All right, Nate, are there other straw polls we need to take yet? You are, yeah, there.
Yeah, I think the number 2 here, the kind of fraction of first floor commercial, and I think the discussion could be, yeah, so, you know, at one point we talked about could we allow apartments without a cap on units here and make those special permit, have mixed-use buildings be a site plan review. I mean, heck, if we have some design standards, are they just by right? Now, I know that's too radical, but
Oh, come
know-
on, this is our chance to be radical.
this is our chance. You know, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like if we really worked on this and we said, okay, this is where we want this, could we have a by right use like a mixed use building? Because if we have some prescriptive standards and dimensional standards, it's like, you know, how much do we need? Why would we need too much review? But I think for now, if we're focusing on number 2, is really about the kind of requirement of first floor or non-residential space in a building. I think that's really important. You know, I agree with Janet that when we proposed the 30%, a lot of other communities had 50% or 100% on the ground floor, you know, the whole facade facing the street. You know, I think it's a difficult thing to know what's right, you know, and markets change and uses change. I think that, you know, as people mentioned, that if people design apartment buildings, they probably wouldn't do a podium build, and so you lose that ability to convert it though in the future. And so I think having some requirement is a good thing. I just don't know, you know, what that is.
Mhm.
And I will say just quickly, you know, I was talking to another planner, and he said, you know, look at Greenfield, right? They've done a lot of investment in public buildings, courthouse, you know, the YMCA, library. They're putting a fire station. You know, Wilson's might be changing, but, you know, there's a lot of kind of underutilized storefronts in downtown there, and they've been trying for years with the bank and different things. And we're just, right, we're trying to talk about what, you know, what is the answer there, right? Is it, you know, how come, you know, they have a lot of building there. How come that could become like a retail ground floor mecca, right? I mean, there's parking, it's walkable. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's just, you know, is there ways, as we've talked about, to incentivize it? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't really have an answer, but I like the idea of requiring mixed use buildings. And I think this could be something that we discuss a little bit more.
Okay. Do you want to have some conversation about it now? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, you know, at
Okay.
one point I was saying have this overly be just apartments, and then, you know, I
Yeah.
think I was persuaded that it can be other things. And so,
Mhm. Okay, well, I mean, I'll just say, I had thought if we required the architecture of the building to be configured for commercial use and retail on the first floor with a lot of glass, frequent entries, strong horizontal at the top of the first floor between the first and second floors with, you know, that can serve as a sign band or as a place for awnings. Then you've built in the architecture so that the building can function for retail and commercial behind it. And then, you know, even if the, you know, the glass got papered over and used as a, I don't know, massage parlor, because they don't want everybody watching the massages, at least the architecture is there so that it's flexible and it's commercial. You know, maybe somebody would blank out the glass and put their apartment behind it, or leave the glass open and, you know, just be on display. I don't know, but you know, I thought the architecture was the place to start and make sure it was configured for a commercial retail use. And then some amount of that facade, if we can require it to be commercial behind it, that would be great. You know, I just picked 30 feet as a sort of minimally viable depth. And I think that's better than doing a percentage, because you know, the percentage, the floor area is going to vary depending on the size of the building. So that was Doug's thoughts about it. And I haven't seen any other hands go up yet. Are there other board members who wanted to comment on number 2 here? Jesse?
Doug, have you, oh,
I was just gonna say, Bruce and Janet both have their hand up. And
Oh,
then
they
I
do?
also,
Oh, I'm not seeing everybody. Okay, thank you. Janet,
So, I've worked in Greenfield a bit, and I think Greenfield's problem isn't a lack of desire, and they have beautiful buildings, is that they're not next to the region's largest employer. And so UMass is the largest employer of Amherst in the region, and it's the largest employer of Northampton. And so, this area is right next to UMass. And, even though it has those like funky little strange buildings, they're almost all filled with kind of small shops. And, so I think it's definitely like if you build it, they will come. Look at Hadley. They have built tiny building after tiny building. People have built buildings on spec. They've filled it with people who are doing dental work and this and that and the other thing. And so I think, and then Hadley itself has become a huge kind of shopping draw for the region with its big boxes. So, and then, I think we recently heard that the bid that we had almost a very low vacancy rate in, Amherst Center. And so I think that we should be confident that something will come in. And we also know that the rental or the housing market is so strong that it could support those, kind of spaces being empty for a little while. But I do think if we build it, they will fill up because they're so convenient to UMass and they're so convenient to, all parts of town as well as Route 9. And so I just think that, there seems to be no end of small businesses moving into Hadley and, what seem to be sort of, little buildings that people wouldn't even want to go out of their way to go to, but there they are, so I think we should be confident that if we build something that's really attractive, zone it really like for attractive stuff, it will bring people in.
all right. Thanks, Janet. Bruce,
I agree with everything Janet said. All three of those points, I think, are well made. But in addition, one of the earlier conversations we've had was that we really should, in pursuit of a variety of housing types, that this was mentioned the last time we had this discussion, that it would be good to require or somehow encourage some housing to touch the ground as well, so that it can have outdoor space, because families would prefer that. And whether that can be done or not, I'm not sure, but as a goal, yes, an aspiration, an ideal, a vision. So some first floor space should be, I think, ideally that type of housing. So back to the fraction. So I think in agreement with Janet and with you, I think the fraction should be high. I think more than 30%, although I know you were not supportive of percentages, but not 100%. So I would think it should be probably at least 50%. I mean, the bulk of the first floor area should be designated and should be as expected to be used for the vitalizing activities associated with retail, commercial, and community uses. So I think a higher than 50% floor space, but not 100. Between,
okay.
I don't know, 50 and 75 arbitrarily would be my sense of what might be ideal. Now, the other thing we could do, I suppose, as we do with parking, is that having made that declaration, we could say that this ratio can be varied at the discretion of the board for reasons of, and the same kind of three words that describe the basis on which we can vary parking. We could come up with 3 words that describe why we could. It would be in the interest of the town for us to vary or allow a variation of that designated percentage. So that might give us the flexibility, but certainly by declaring the percentage as the requirement, we express the intention.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Jesse,
I'm thinking about if we can require it, the whole facade, but not the whole depth of the building. I would think that to me is a pretty logical way to go, which could also accomplish some of what Bruce was just bringing up about some apartments towards the rear touching outside space. But it also, to me, ties back into the parking issue a little bit. If we're gonna try and encourage all this commercial activity, I think there also needs to be reasonable parking to accommodate that, not just from the people who are living there. But again, maybe the developers would recognize that and put in enough parking. Not sure how to handle that.
Okay. All right, Nate, there's some input.
Yeah, I was gonna say sorry if I could just jump in quickly. We had talked about that a while ago when we looked at the mixed use. The current standards, as Bruce mentioned, like a waiver provision, but it's tricky because the developer would come in and say that they can't fill it, or that it could change and it's early on in the process. And so, to me, I'd want like a rigorous review, like, a budget pro forma or reasons why, or, how have they actually tried to market that space or find a tenant? And so I feel like typically when they come to planning board for site plan review, they might not even have tenants in mind, other than they might have some ideas for general size of space or something. And so I don't know, I find I feel like it would be hard to ask for a waiver unless we're asking for more information as to why they can or can't fill that space, which might not be kind of in sequence for how the permitting typically goes.
Right. Chris, I'm going to call on you next.
Yeah, so that waiver doesn't have to be granted at the time the building is built. It could be something that's flexible that could go on into the future. So when the owner of the building has a tenant that can fill, 30% or 50% or whatever the requirement is, that's fine. But then over time, it may be that he can't fill that space, and then he could come in for, maybe it's a special permit to be allowed to reduce the amount of commercial space and turn that commercial space into residential space. So that, I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be decided at the outset of the project. It can be decided later on when we know whether these spaces can be filled or not. Thank you.
Okay. Bruce.
I had my hand up to say something like that, but couldn't figure out how to say it, and I took my hand down. So thank you, Chris. That was great. But I was going to say that I think the words that we've used in the past are for compelling reasons. So whatever the driver of the granting of a waiver, it's for compelling reasons. So and then reasons of whatever, but we have to have it. It would have to be compelling reasons, and I think the way Chris structured it is one way of establishing a compelling reason, but it's on the basis of some recent history. I think that's good. I like that.
So, that would say that you have to build the building to the percentage that we are calling for. And then say within, or not sooner than, say, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years, the owner could apply for a special permit to allow some of that space to be used for residential use. Is that kind of where we're headed?
I was thinking that to some degree, yes, but as we've seen with some of the houses downtown, a wily developer could design it and build it analogous to the construction of these apartments that have large bedrooms and no living space, which are clearly not intended for family. And then when families don't come in because the design is not suited to them, you then go and ask for a special, some kind of a subsequent permission to not comply. So I can see how that this could be gamed by wily developers, but on the other hand, maybe we just have to we're trying to get what we want, and we're trying to figure out ways in which we can achieve that. So I think the goal is laudable. I'll shut up.
Okay, Bruce. Karen, you're next.
I think the problem, we all were hoping that we wouldn't drive all the mom and pop shops out of town when we took down all the little cheap buildings. And so the problem is that you can build it, but unless the rent of a place like that is compatible with the shop, it's not going to be there. And so that's the reason why we entertain the thought of having enough with 5 stories, enough residential space so that somehow the developer could charge less perhaps for the commercial. And if we just open it up and say, well, you know, he can come and apply again because it's empty, then that might very well happen. So this is what we're doing. We're trying to put our head together to figure out how can we, if we have enough places where a developer can make money, how can we incentivize him to have commercial or, you know, public, just the kind of businesses that we would love to see.
Okay. Thank you. Nate, you're next.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do this, and I started it was to calculate, you know, the kind of the gross square feet of office and retail on University Drive or in the overlay now. And I guess my question would be, you know, do we want to maintain that number or, you know, or some proportion of it, right? So, you know, it's kind of to, we're saying that, you know, if we allow this, you know, are we actually losing space? My thought is we'd actually be gaining it, but I'd want to have kind of that sense, right? So if there's so many square feet now and we allow a certain build out of the overlay, you know, is 50% going to get us what we have at least now or more than what we have now? And so I don't know if that would help with the decision. You know, I mean, I don't know. I like the idea of maybe requiring it and they design it and they build it and then, you know, maybe a separate permit if they can't fill it. But we'd have to have some pretty good reasons why that's the case. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Nate. Janet.
So I'm concerned, like, I mean, so just looking around town now, and I don't want to look at this moment of time because life goes on and the economy changes and everything, but the mixed use buildings in town that have had, like, you know, the open spaces, a lot of the owners are actually people who've owned rental property and maybe aren't really that familiar with the you know, commercial market or retail or, you know, renting professional offices, or maybe they don't need to make a profit. And so there's a few mixed use buildings in town that have open spaces and they seem to be thriving, and the people who have owned them have gone on to build other mixed use buildings. So, you know, I think I hope I get my numbers wrong. Right. I mean, one East Pleasant Street had Protocol that came in after 5 or 6 years. And you could say, you know, they couldn't fill that space, but they were obviously making enough money to build 2 more buildings in town, right? And so, you know, the same thing is true on Main Street, I can't remember, Mr. Roblowski's building has never filled that small space. And then he has some empty spaces now where there previously were some offices. So part of me thinks is the rental market is so lucrative, it's subsidizing these empty spaces. And so, and then part of me thinks, you know, it's just, you know, retail's taken this big hit because of COVID and we're not sure where retail or commercial is going right now. But I think if you're going to get an exception, it should be not that, oh, I couldn't fill this building, this space, is I'm not making any money in this building anymore because of this empty space. If you're making enough money on your rentals to subsidize an empty space, you're doing pretty good. You know, hopefully you'd want to bring in some small businesses just to keep the street thriving. It's probably not going to put you into profits. But I think that, you know, when we look around town, everybody who has had an empty space has gone on to build more buildings. And so it's not like people are going bankrupt because they had some small, you know, 50% or 30% of commercial space. So if you're going to do an exemption, put it on their economic profitability, not I just couldn't find anyone to fill this space, because I think I've actually read this in the small towns thing. It's sort of a phenomenon where the owners often don't really want to deal with commercial tenants because they're more work, or the spaces are too small, so you have more tenants. They rather just build a big space, leave it empty, and have apartments upstairs. So I think we have to put that exemption or, the permit in a way that really says, like, show us your numbers. And I also know that everybody hates to show numbers, but at least say, if you are losing money on this building because of this 30% commercial space on the first floor, then we'll give you the exemption, but you had to show that to us.
Okay. Nate, oh, that was not a hand. Okay. All right. Want to move on in the list?
Yeah, I think we can work on that. We haven't talked too much about the cap on number of apartments or size of buildings. I think that could be under number 3. I see there's a few hands raised, but I think that's another important piece. Do we, if we're not looking for massive buildings, is it, it could be both through unit count or through, building lot coverage or other things that we have built, into this. So.
All right. Looks like Janet has a thought.
I have a possible add to the list, and I'd be interested in Nate's thoughts about it or other people. I can't remember where this is. I think it's in the apartment section of the zoning bylaw, where there's a requirement of a mix of unit sizes. I don't know if it's 2 or 3, I can't remember, or you can't have 50% of any one kind. And I wondered, we have a bunch of mixed use buildings that are like all studios or, all 1 bedrooms. And is there a negative to that? Or do we want to say we want a mix of bedroom types? And, you could have your studios, you could have your 1 bedrooms, throw in a 3 bedroom or 2, like, like, Nate, what's your impression as how are those buildings working? Are they good? Or does it matter? The unit mix?
Yeah, I think, I'd mentioned that, for affordable housing developments, if they use, a tax credit program, it requires 10% be 3 bedrooms or larger. And so, what I've heard is that the developers will put, we require no more than 50% be 1 bedroom size. And that's fairly new. And we applied it to mixed use buildings and apartments.
Okay.
Unless they're all affordable, and then it could be all 1 size. But what I found is developers, will put, right now, studios 1s and 2s, they usually put the 2s in corners where they can find the space, maybe between stairs and elevators. And then they, will work the proportions to meet our, the requirement. I don't, when we first did this, there were a few property managers that would say, well, we don't want to have a lot of 3 bedroom units because we have trouble filling those. Or, they might say it might have difficult filling certain sizes. I don't, but I think that's a preference. I think that, I've seen more developers that will have different bedroom counts. So, I don't think it's a bad thing. I guess my question would be, are we trying to get different tenants, different end users by having different bedroom sizes?
Yeah.
And maybe that's okay. It's really hard to have typically that kind of the internal control. So, we could have something like that proportion of bedrooms or 10% be a certain size. I don't know if we could do much more than that. I don't know if it's a problem. I think that, it actually might make a developer, think about it a little bit more. But, if we're providing enough incentive in this overlay in terms of development potential, is that, right, is that enough to deter it? Right. So, we put some of these controls in here in this overlay, and wow, it doesn't get used for 2 years. Maybe we're missing something. We could revisit it. But if we think we want that, we could try it, right? We could have kind of a no more than 50% and at least 10% be 3 bedrooms or something, right? And we have some conditions in there. I think that's okay for now. I haven't heard enough to say no.
What about like 2 bedrooms? Because it seems to me a 1 bedroom you can, a friend of mine had two sisters and she had a family of five living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York. They're intensely close, as adults. But it strikes me that at least two bedrooms for a family. And I wonder if everything's a studio or one bedroom, is that gonna just push families out or just not, like what's the minimum to get a family in?
Yeah, I mean, we'd say a 2-bedroom, right? You could essentially get, you could have 4 users, 4 people in that, 4 persons in a 2-bedroom. And, when you calculate, say, rental amounts, you can take the average. So with a 2-bedroom, it could be anywhere from 2 users to 4, persons. So then when you do, say, like an affordable rent calculation, you would say, you take all those number of persons in a household. So a 3-bedroom even, gets you a lot more potential persons in that unit. So, I agree. I think a 2-bedroom would allows the flexibility of having, a multiple person household more than a studio or one.
And at least based on some of the larger buildings downtown, at least one of those has a number of 4 bedrooms without very much living space, which is clearly geared to students.
Right.
So, would you want to not allow 4 bedrooms, or would you want to limit it to studios, 1s and 2s, and have a few 3s? I think my experience, or my impression or my memory of the old North Village at UMass was that there were some 3-bedroom units, and there wasn't a lot of demand for those by the graduate families and the undergraduate families. The families tended to live in the 2-bedroom units, even if they had 3 generations living there. So that, those were young families by and large, and 2 bedrooms was preferred. At least that's my memory. So I don't think there's any 3 bedrooms in the new complex that replaced North Village.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is either, actually.
Yeah. All right, you want to move on?
I guess, we're still having time about kind of the capping the number of units in an apartment or in a building, or, I guess we haven't really, I guess I still want to talk about that. Is capping the unit count important, or is it more about having some massing and design guidelines? I think we could, because we do have this unit type mix, which I think is something we can work on as well.
Well, I mean, I kind of picked 100 as an arbitrary number. If you think about it in terms of massing, I guess I was hoping to have facades that were not longer than, say, 60 or 65 feet wide on the street. And the building could go back from there, however far it needed to get to 100. At 5 stories, 4 of which are residential, say 4.5. You probably have 20 apartments on each floor. So from a sort of hallway point of view, that's not super long, but it's kind of medium. And so, but whether they're small units or big units, that certainly would have a big impact on the actual mass of the building. But I don't think it's bad to have a mix of some smaller buildings and some bigger buildings. That would be fine. I think might even be desirable. So if I had a 100-unit studio building next to a 100-unit 3-bedroom unit building, that might be fine. I don't know. And but I don't know how to sort of do a massing criteria for the depth of the building. To me, that's starting to get into the lot area. And then you get into how much, if you have 100 units and you need a half a parking space per unit, that's 50 parking spaces. You know, how much of those parcels is a 50, is a 50-foot or a 50-spot parking lot? I don't really know, and then you need to get back there. So is the access off of University Drive, or is there a sort of service alley that runs parallel to the University Drive farther back? That tends to be is that a private way? And then you need to have multiple owners who are coordinating the location and easement access and that kind of thing. So the access is probably off of University Drive. And then you've got a 15 or 20-foot vehicular drive between buildings. Janet.
I'm actually starting to fade, but I do love this discussion, and I do think what you're talking about is really interesting to me, because I look at the lot sizes and think what's possible there, and that's way beyond my wheelhouse, but I wonder if maybe we could dip into that, or the facades and the treatments, because I do think the variety is really key to something that's like an exciting place to live or to shop at. And so what the facade and the width of it, I think, is really important. I wonder if we want to get some public comment for people who have sat here patiently, if they have anything to add. But I wouldn't mind ending the meeting like in the next 20 minutes or so, just as a personal.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about 9:30 as a good time to stop. Let's see. I don't see any other hands. Chris?
I was just going to suggest that we look at, and I think we can do this in the office, but look at the buildings that have been built downtown and think about what their facade lengths are like. Because, I think some of the buildings, like say 1 East Pleasant, well, you may not like the fact that it's right up on the street, but I think the massing of the building is pretty good, and its configuration is pretty good, and it's got a fairly long facade against the street that I don't find oppressive. I find it oppressive that it's so close to the street, but not the length of the facade itself. On the other hand, there is another building that's going up now that has a facade that is really long. And so I was just going to encourage people to think about the various buildings that have been built recently in the downtown. There's Spring Street, there's one East Pleasant, there's Kendrick Place, there's 11 and 13 East Pleasant, and think about what you, I won't say like, because not everybody likes those buildings, but kind of like think about the proportions of those buildings and what works and what doesn't work. And that might help to inform this discussion, because just saying, facade lengths less than 60 feet, that doesn't mean anything to me. And 60 feet isn't that long. So, just think about that a little bit, and maybe we can come back and have a little bit more of a richer, more informed discussion about this next time around.
Okay. Fred? Fred, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I clicked on it, but I didn't click it on just the right place. Yeah, I'm wondering how we're doing in town with the staff knows in terms of commercial occupancy, because those are supposed to be commercial on the first floor. Are they just standing open, or are they starting to fill those?
Fred, Chris or Nate, do you want to comment?
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
would say
think-
that Gabrielle has done a really good job of trying to fill a lot of the spaces downtown. I don't know what's going on with 11 and 13 East Pleasant, but I know of the smaller buildings downtown, she's really worked very hard on getting those places filled. So I'm sorry, Nate, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, I was gonna say, I think we had mentioned that some sat vacant. I feel like it's been an awkward few years, but it seems like they're starting to fill up. And so, yeah, I think it is a really good question, though. I mean, for instance, there's some upper floor vacancies for non-residential space in older buildings downtown that have been vacant for years, but some of it is, it's not accessible, or it's, maybe difficult to access. There could be other reasons why. In terms of facade length, yeah, I had looked at what's there. So like, Athena's pizza in that building, that's 130 feet, right? And Charter is like 120 feet, and Charter commercial. And then there's Big Y, and the post office is pretty long. So, if you, I mean, to me, where the Hampshire Bike Exchange, if that's 130 feet, it's only one floor, but that's over 100 feet. Is that okay? I mean, Doug, I do like the idea though of breaking up facades even on a property and having two buildings. And so I think having an entry drive is okay. If we require, if we try to get some plaza space there, rather than, if we have a property that could have a 300-foot wide building, I don't really think we would want that.
Yeah, I had used 65 feet because most those buildings downtown
Right.
that are apartment buildings are sort of between 52 and 56 feet wide. That's sort of the optimal depth for an apartment with a center double loaded corridor. And so, and I was just talking about that as the dimension of facing on the frontage, facing the street. In terms of the depth going back, I wasn't terribly worried about that, actually. I know that the facade of 11 and 13 East Pleasant Street is very long heading back. And right now it's highly exposed on the north side, and you really do see it. But on the south side, you basically don't notice it because it's kind of obscured by 1 East Pleasant. So, if we expect things to kind of fill in even along that stretch, maybe where that M&T bank is the next piece to get built, that long facade is likely to get obscured. So I was, the dimension I threw out was about the frontage.
Yep.
And, I mean, 130 feet, that may be fine also, but it's starting to, I mean, it's fine at Athena's, but if we took Athena's and went 5 stories, we might feel differently.
Yeah, no,
But I'm not adamant about that particular dimension.
No, I agree. I do think that at some point, we have to, if I think it's cheaper to build a box than have some articulation or step backs. And I think at some point we would actually want to require that, in a break and plane more than, when we did our BL overlay, I think we said, like a foot or something. To me, I'd want more than that. I'd want, so anyways,
Well,
yeah.
there's sort of 2 scales of breaking on that facade. One is some interest within the building so that it's not just a box.
Right.
And then there's the scale of how big is the box.
Right.
So, I could say, yeah, a 12-inch step within the facade every 20 feet. I mean, so that you don't get a flat box. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Bruce.
In the interest of wrapping this up around 9:30 or so, I think I'd like to hear, we've got a number of people still on our attendees, and 2 of them at least have got their hand up, and I'm ready to hear, because I know some of these folks have been thinking about this probably as much as we have. So why don't we stop talking and listen to what others have got to say, and then continue it at another date.
All right. All right, that's 2 members in favor of public comment. And Janet, I assume you dropped your hand so we could go up to public comment. All right, so we have 2 members of the public. We'll start with Pam Rooney. Please give us your name and your street address, and you have 3 minutes.
Nate, I have,
Pam Field Sadler, do you have the timer?
I'm working on it. Nate, I'm gonna have to put your screen down. Okay. Perfect, thank you.
All right, great. So let's bring over Pam.
Hi, everybody. Pam Rooney, 42 Cottage Street. I really am, really appreciate the conversation. I'm loving the depth of the conversation. These are very disparate points, sort of an accumulation of what you've talked about over the evening. The first item might be the capacity or the cap on number of units. I think that's probably not a problem. I think it's really the size of the building, the mass of the building, and let the developer build what they can within that box. Let's see. I think Doug mentioned that, you know, having the small end of the building toward the street, a little bit like the example of 70 University Drive. That building seems to work because the gable end is narrow. It's facing the street, and you don't get a sense of the size of the building. So the actual length of it is almost immaterial. So I like that that capability. I like the use of using the secondary road, or whatever we're calling it, and taking advantage of all of that land mass, which is buildable, by the way, in that wetland, and taking advantage of that. So that's good. The commercial aspect of it seems very important because this is really our second tier of commercial development in town. It is, you know, besides Route 9, you know, with the car repair shops and everything, you know, as you go toward Belchertown, it's really our only other commercial area, and I would love to see it emphasize at least the presence of, oh, and by the way, I'm no longer the liaison to the planning board.
Oh, okay.
At least they haven't voted me in as such, so I'm speaking as a person. Let's see. Yeah, the commercial aspect is very important, even if they can create temporary spaces that are used. I think that's very important. Having the fact that University Drive is really a fairly low speed zone, multiple curb cuts to me seem totally okay, as long as we retain a sense of a strong alley, a strong sense of street with street trees. I think that's terrific.
All right, you're down at 20 seconds.
Oh, okay, sorry. The mix of units, I think somebody mentioned, I think maybe Janet mentioned, the mix of units that we currently have for mixed use development may not be a bad thing, but it could be lifted if in fact it were an incentive to create something else in this zone. And I would, I forgot my last
All right,
point.
you are out of town.
And I'm out of town. Okay, thank you all.
Okay, all right, thanks. Next, we will have Susanna Musprat. Could bring her over. And Susanna, give us your name and your street address. And we did receive your letter this afternoon.
Susanna Musprat, 38 North Prospect Street. Yeah, thank you for looking at my letter. I was really distressed to hear you just, Nate, sort of toss out the window the idea that this needs to be a kind of reciprocal agreement between the town and the university. That is where you all started when you started thinking about different areas in town where there could be more development, and how that could be used to incentivize the university to do something. And we don't have the bargaining power after we've already changed the zoning that we have now to open those discussions with the university. It just can't go on that they keep adding more and more students, and we have to provide the housing for them. And I think we've reached a breaking point. But the other thing I want to emphasize is what I said at the end, that this is a good time to let the community in, get people together in a room where we can all see each other and bat around some ideas. Why not hear from more people? And then the final point, I hope Nate will try to calculate the current commercial and make sure that we keep at least that amount of commercial space in the new plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. And the third hand is from Janet Keller. If we could bring Janet over
Whoop.
and restart the clock.
Yep. Janet, you'll need to unmute.
All
So,
right, Janet.
Janet Keller,
Street
yes.
address?
My street address is, I do have a street address. And I'm obviously very anxious. Let me come back to it. I live on Pulpit Hill Road, 120 Pulpit Hill Road, up in North Amherst. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So I too appreciate the richness and the thoughtfulness of the planning board discussion and the comments from Susanna and Pam. And I want to say what's probably obvious to you, how much I love University Drive between Amity Street and Route 9. And a lot of the things that we've all talked about tonight would, if we do them right, preserve what makes that a special place. The greenness, the setbacks, the size of things and the care in placing them, as Pam noted, with Barry's building at 70 University Drive. So I would say keep up the good work, and kudos for the discussions tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to make a comment? Okay. All right, so I'm seeing it's almost 20 after 9. And maybe we'll have a few more comments. We've got the committee and liaison reports to still do before our meeting ends. So if you absolutely need to say something, raise your hand. And we've got Nate and Bruce with their hands up. Nate.
Sure, thanks, Bruce. I was gonna respond to Susanna. I mean, I didn't throw out the idea of working with UMass, but I don't think that we can, I think we can tell them we're looking at this, we already have, and that we encourage them to think of, how they could respond in terms of development along northern part of University Drive or Mass Ave. But I don't see it as us saying, well, we're going to enter into an agreement, some binding agreement or contract with UMass, requiring them to do something because we're doing this. So I see it as actually a great opportunity for the town to look at this section of University Drive, whether or not UMass, takes advantage of it. I think we can take advantage of it, and I think we can encourage them to, to build upon it. But I don't think we can require them to do something or get into a contract. So I still think that, the planning board had a conversation with Tony and Nancy, and I think we'd like to have it again. And I think we can continue these discussions about how we can partner with the university and have that, a reciprocal relationship. But I don't see it as a kind of a contract, so or a requirement that they do something. So I don't want to belittle that. I think it's a really important piece you brought up. So I just think that, we're trying to keep the dialogue open and collegial, and I think that's where I'd like to go with that.
All right, Thanks, Nate. Bruce?
I just wanted to ask Nate, I purposely kept this to the end because I sent you, Nate, an email later in the day. I know whether you saw it, but I'm prepared to put some time and effort into doing some kind of build out studies, just basically I might need guidance on and so forth, but I'm probably able to do this sort of thing with some reasonable guidance. I take some of the load off and so forth. But I would need to get the documentation. Is it possible that I give you a call? We can I can produce some hopefully useful numerical studies or whatever we call it. I mean, I think, Doug, you've been doing this, and I haven't seen it, but I think it could be helpful. And if and I've got some time, I could probably spend a few hours on this over the next month or so.
Yeah, Bruce, I saw your email. So, I think we can talk later this week, early next week, and whether it's taking the GIS and making it into we can put it in a CAD file and have it be scaled to a certain size, whatever. We can talk about what you would want. So, yeah.
Yes, I've got the software to do all this sort of stuff. I can do it. I just wasn't able to download the basic files in a way that I could import them in a way that was sensible, and a few other things. So with a small amount of briefing and support, I think I could probably be helpful. So I'll try and be so.
Okay. Janet, last thoughts on this topic?
For this evening, I think that this is an opportunity to start talking to some of the planners at UMass. And we need to open that door. We could open that door and start working together, because they're going to have all sorts of information about what the university's plans or maybe just ideas, what they think students want, or what's going on with the different dorms and things like that. If there are plans for University Drive, but maybe it's not University Drive, maybe it's Mass Ave. And so I think we should just sit down over sandwiches and just have, meet with some planners and just say, hey, we're working on this. What are your thoughts? Because you guys, we all live here and we're all working with the same population. So I think we should just take this opportunity to just start talking and picking people's brains and seeing what's going on. I totally appreciate Nancy and Tony coming, but they're really, they're kind of communications liaisons, and not to disinvite them, because I'll have a sandwich really with anybody, especially if there's coffee. But I just think it'd be a good opportunity to sort of sit down with some of the planning staff and just say, hey, this is what we're looking at. Are you guys looking at this part, or do you have ideas for a University Drive? Because a lot of us who live here are just staring at it and thinking about it. So I hope we can think of some way to open the door and just chat.
Okay. All right. Maybe Chris and Nate, that's probably a conversation for you guys with Dave or Paul, I suppose. Okay, all right, so time is 9:24 and we will conclude this conversation for this evening. Nate, I hope we've given you at least a head start on where we want to go. And then Chris, I hope you and Nate will come back to us on when you want to schedule this on our agenda next. Okay, all right, why don't we move back into the rest of our agenda? We were up to our planning board committee and liaison reports. Bruce, PVPC.
Nothing to report there. There is a meeting next Thursday, so on the 6th, I might have something. Well, actually, no, it'll be the night before the next meeting, so we won't have that. But there is a meeting coming up shortly, and I do see their notes and things that are circulated, and I read them, but it's fairly dry, and there's nothing that I think I would pass on from what I've seen that's been circulated that's useful here tonight.
Okay. I don't have anything new to report on CPAC. We haven't had a meeting in the last couple of weeks. And I don't expect us to have very many meetings for quite a while. Karen, Design Review Board?
We met on Monday. Christine was there. Two very positive things. there's going to be, we approved the taking down of the awning and of a really exciting new little shop market, Astor and Pine, which is on 189 North Pleasant. It's kind of where that Vinci hair salon was. So they're going to have wine and cheese and local produce. And they're very wonderful young couple. So it's very exciting. It's something that's really needed in town. And the other thing was 55 South Pleasant, which is where Hastings was. That's kind of an ongoing thing, but that's also, I think, a wonderful development in the center of town. They're going to take down the wooden, and we proved that, they're going to take down the wooden structure that is now, kind of dilapidated and hasn't been used for a long time. And there in that place is going to be the Amherst College store in the old Hastings store. And then in the space where the structure is coming down, there's a bit of an arcade and open space, very beautifully designed, I think. And going back to a tower, which is 5 stories, by the way, and hidden a little bit behind it is a 5-story apartment building, which I think Barry Roberts is developing and owns. The whole thing is very attractive. There will be less cars going into that very narrow space because a lot of parking behind there is going to be gone. Instead, the building will be larger. And it just looks inviting. We talked a lot about the design, the different colors, the way that it's structured. It's going to be fine-tuned and they're open to advice. But both of those, I think, are going to be real additions for the center of town. So, yeah, it was nice.
Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. Janet, your hand is up.
Karen, could we get a picture, some pictures of that? Because I just saw a picture in the Gazette that I could hardly see. I'd be interested in seeing the changes. Could you send us those docs or?
Are the design review board packets on the town website?
That's what I was just going to say. Go on the town website, look at the design review board page and go to their packets and you can see all about this project there.
It must be the late hour. I should have thought of that. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Next we will have Chris, CRC, anything?
So the CRC is still dealing with the rental registration bylaw that is slowly moving through. They will be taking on the solar bylaw soon. I understand they have been wanting to be in touch with me about that. And so we'll be hearing more about that. I told Pam and Doug that the CRC experienced Zoom bombing last night, and it was very unfortunate and ugly language. And, so we discussed a little bit about how to handle it. Unfortunately, there's been a recent court case that kind of says that we need to let people say what they want to say, but there are obviously limits on it. And the limitation that we were given by Dave Zomick, who was at the CRC, he said, well, if there's hate speech involved, then you can cut it off. And obviously the chair can cut it off if it doesn't have anything to do with the subject at hand. But for general comment period, it's difficult to limit the speech unless it is hate speech. So just, bear with us as we try to learn how to deal with this.
Chris, is it true that we don't really have to have public comment period?
Well, public comment period is required by the charter. So everybody who has a board or committee is supposed to have a period of public comment. But there's nothing in state law that says you have to have public comment, if that's what you're asking.
Well, and does the charter say how frequently we need to do that?
I think you have to have it at every meeting.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we're up to the report of the chair, and the chair has no report tonight. How about staff? Any report from staff?
Well,
You gonna have another staff member soon or not?
hopefully, we just were able to post the planner position. HR put it up, I don't know, Monday, I guess. And so we're hoping that we get some response to that because we didn't have a very easy time of it the first 2 times that we sought another planner, but we really need another planner. So hopefully we'll get one soon.
Well, maybe there are some planners graduating this spring from UMass who want to stay in town.
Yep.
Okay, is that it from staff?
That's all I have for now. Yep.
Okay. And so our next meeting is next week, right?
That's right. Yes, and that's a continuation of the Fort Rivers School public hearing. And we haven't received any new information, but I did send an email to the architect today to ask if he was planning to include anything in your packet that's going out on Friday. So hopefully he'll be responsive to that.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Bruce?
Doug, I tuned into the zoning board hearing on the school last Thursday, just because I was curious to see how they would handle it and so forth. And in the conversation that Tim Cooper was orienting the zoning board, he on the subject of the PV arrays, he mentioned that the array that the mounted array that was close to the western property boundary, he mentioned, I think as a kind of a sentence, said that the planning board wasn't very pleased with this, some version, something like that, and that he suggested, I think, if I recall, that they were intending to make some revision to that. So, Chris, I think we would definitely want to, if they're going to have a revision to their array arrangements so far as diminishing the intrusion into the setback, that would be something to look forward to. I may be wrong, but that's what I heard.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, Bruce reminded me that the Zoning Board of Appeals did approve the structures in the FPC zoning district. So that was the result. They gave a special permit for those structures in the FPC, and they were puzzled about why we have an FPC if we already have a 100-year floodplain, FEMA floodplain overlay district. But in any event, they did approve it, and so that was good.
Okay. And is the existence of the FPC something we should talk about in a future meeting?
Yes.
So we can put that in our list of things to talk about. Okay. All right. Anybody have anything else to mention? If not, I see the time. Oh, Nate.
Yeah, just quickly, that the project Karen mentioned, 45 and 55 South Pleasant, that's coming to the planning board for site plan review. So it's expected that in March, that would probably be, the opening of the public hearing for that. So, you can look on the DRB packet, and then, just knowing that it will become, planning board application as well.
Okay. No other hands that I see. Time is 9:34. And thanks for hanging in there. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Recording stopped.
Good night, Mr. Marshall. We did it.
Good night, Pam.
Have a good week.
You too.
Thank you.